My name is Samantha. I'm 29 years old, and I've built a successful tech startup from the ground up here in Austin, Texas. For years, my father Greg preached family first at every Sunday dinner, every holiday gathering, every major life decision. So when I invested $180,000 of my own money to save our family's struggling restaurant business, I never imagined he'd turn around and hand control of the company to my sister's manipulative boyfriend, Derek, effectively cutting me out of everything I'd worked to rebuild. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. To understand how devastating this betrayal felt, you need to know about my family and the dynamics that shaped our relationships. I am the older daughter by 3 years, and from childhood, I was the responsible one. While my sister, Chloe, was out partying in high school, I was studying for my SATs and working part-time jobs to save for college. When she dropped out of community college twice to find herself, I was graduating summa cum laude with a computer science degree and already building my first software application. My father, Gregory Walsh, is 59 years old and spent 30 years building Walsh Family Bistro from a small diner into a moderately successful restaurant in downtown Austin. He's old school Texas, believes in hard work, traditional values, and the importance of keeping family businesses in the family. Family first wasn't just his motto, it was practically his religion. He'd repeat it whenever someone needed help, whenever there was a conflict to resolve, or whenever he wanted to justify his decisions. My mother, Patricia, is 57 and has always been the emotional center of our family. She worked alongside Dad in the restaurant for years, managing the books and coordinating with suppliers. Mom has an incredible ability to see the best in people, sometimes to a fault. She's the peacemaker who smooths over Dad's rough edges and mediates between Chloe and me when our different life choices create tension. Then there's my sister, Chloe. At 26, she's beautiful, charming, and has never met a responsibility she couldn't avoid. Growing up, while I was the straight-A student involved in every academic club, Chloe was the popular one who could talk her way out of trouble with a smile. Teachers loved her despite her average grades. Boys fought for her attention. Even our parents seemed enchanted by her carefree spirit, often excusing her failures as Chloe being Chloe. The disparity in how we were treated became glaringly obvious in our 20s. When I started my tech company, DevStream Solutions, I worked 80-hour weeks for 2 years straight. I ate ramen noodles for months, lived in a studio apartment with a broken air conditioner, and reinvested every penny back into the business. When the company finally took off and landed our first major client, a contract worth $2.3 million, my father's response was a brief, "That's nice, honey," before turning his attention back to Chloe's latest drama. Meanwhile, every time Chloe needed money for rent, got fired from another retail job, or wanted to take an expensive yoga teacher training course in Costa Rica, my parents opened their wallets without question. When I pointed out that she was 25 years old and had never held a job for more than 6 months, Dad would give me his signature lecture about family loyalty and how successful people have an obligation to help those who are struggling. "Family first, Samantha," he'd say, his voice taking on that stern tone that meant the conversation was over. "We look out for each other. That's what families do." I internalized this message completely. Despite building a thriving business and achieving financial independence by age 27, I never stopped trying to prove my worth to my family through acts of service and financial support. When the restaurant's refrigeration system failed 2 years ago, I wrote a $15,000 check without being asked. When Mom needed surgery and their insurance didn't cover everything, I handled the $8,000 gap. When Chloe's car was repossessed, I co-signed for a new one, knowing full well she'd probably default on the payments. Each time, I told myself this was what family meant. Each time, Dad would clap me on the shoulder and say, "You're a good daughter, Samantha. Family first." But I noticed that gratitude seemed to have an expiration date in our household.
Within weeks of any financial help I provided, the family would return to their normal dynamic where my achievements were taken for granted and Chloe's problems received all the attention and concern. The restaurant business had been struggling for years, though Dad was too proud to admit it. Competition from trendy new establishments, rising costs, and changing customer preferences had steadily eroded their profit margins. I could see it in the stress lines around Mom's eyes and the way Dad's shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. But whenever I offered to help with business strategy or suggested bringing in a consultant, Dad would bristle.
"I've been running this restaurant since before you were born," he'd say. "I think I know what I'm doing." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, running a successful company that helped other businesses optimize their operations through technology, but my own father refused to take my advice about saving his struggling restaurant. He'd rather accept my money than my expertise, keeping me in the role of the dutiful daughter who wrote checks but didn't get a voice in important decisions. It was around this time, about 18 months ago, that Chloe started dating Derek Morrison. I should have known from the moment I met him that trouble was brewing. Derek is 28, attractive in a calculated way, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch that seemed out of place given his job as a freelance marketing consultant, a title so vague it immediately raised red flags for someone in my industry. Derek had this way of commanding attention the moment he walked into a room. He spoke with the kind of confidence that made people lean in even when he wasn't saying anything particularly insightful. Within minutes of meeting my parents, he was complimenting Mom's cooking and asking Dad detailed questions about the restaurant business with the kind of focused interest that felt almost too good to be true. "Mr. Walsh, I'd love to hear more about your journey building this business," Derek said during that first family dinner, his eyes wide with apparent fascination. "In my marketing work, I've seen how challenging the restaurant industry can be. The fact that you've maintained success for 3 decades is really impressive." I watched Dad practically puff up with pride. Here was someone who was finally asking the right questions, showing the kind of respect and interest that he felt his life's work deserved. Derek peppered him with follow-up questions about suppliers, customer retention, and local competition, taking mental notes like he was studying for an exam. With Mom, Derek was equally charming, but in a different way. He complimented her earrings, asked about her garden, and somehow managed to work in a story about his own mother's battle with arthritis when Mom mentioned her joint pain. "My mom swears by this supplement routine," he said, pulling out his phone. "Let me send you the details. It's made such a difference for her." The performance was flawless, but that's exactly what it felt like to me, a performance. Having spent years in the tech industry dealing with venture capitalists and smooth-talking salespeople, I developed a pretty good radar for people who were working an angle. Derek set off every alarm bell I had, but my family was completely taken in. Chloe was obviously smitten, hanging on to every word and beaming with pride whenever he charmed her parents. Mom kept commenting on how polite and thoughtful he was. And Dad was practically ready to adopt Derek as the son he'd never had. "Now that's a young man who understands respect," Dad said after Derek and Chloe left that first dinner. "He appreciates what it takes to build something from nothing." I bit my tongue, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek's interest in our family business went well beyond casual curiosity. The questions he'd asked weren't the kind you asked to make polite conversation. They were the questions someone asks when they're evaluating an opportunity. Over the following months, Derek became a fixture at family gatherings, always armed with compliments, thoughtful questions, and an apparent endless fascination with Dad's stories about the early days of the restaurant. He brought flowers for Mom, remembered Dad's favorite cigars, and somehow always knew exactly what to say to make everyone feel special and important. With me, however, Derek was different. Oh, he was still polite, carefully, deliberately polite, but there was a calculation behind his interactions with me that felt distinctly different from his warm engagement with the rest of my family. When he learned about my tech industry, his eyes lit up not with genuine interest, but with the kind of recognition I'd seen in people who were mentally cataloging my potential usefulness. "DevStream Solutions, right?" he said after Chloe had mentioned my company during one family dinner.
I've actually heard of your work. Very impressive what you've built. The tech industry in Austin is really exploding right now. His research felt invasive rather than flattering. Most people didn't just casually know about my relatively niche B2B software company unless they'd specifically looked it up. When I kept my responses vague and professional, Derek's interest noticeably cooled. He still maintained his polite facade, but the warmth he showed my parents and Chloe was absent in our interactions. What bothered me most was how quickly Derek positioned himself as an insider in family discussions. Within 3 months of dating Chloe, he was offering unsolicited advice about restaurant operations, sharing ideas for marketing campaigns, and even suggesting changes to the menu. Dad listened to every word like Derek was delivering pearls of wisdom. Derek has some interesting thoughts about social media marketing, Dad would say, as if Derek's generic suggestions about Instagram posts were revolutionary insights. He thinks we're missing opportunities to reach younger customers. Meanwhile, my years of experience helping businesses develop comprehensive digital strategies were still dismissed as too complicated or not right for our type of customers. Derek could suggest adding an Instagram account and be hailed as a marketing genius. But when I offered to conduct a full analysis of their online presence and customer acquisition funnel, Dad would wave me off with a, "We're doing fine the way we are." The double standard was maddening, but it was also familiar. This was the same dynamic I'd experienced my whole life. Outsiders who charmed my parents received automatic credibility, while my expertise was taken for granted and undervalued. Derek had simply figured out how to exploit this pattern more effectively than anyone before him. As Derek became more entrenched in the family, I started noticing other red flags. Chloe mentioned that he was between clients and helping out at the restaurant for free, but I never saw him actually working there when I stopped by. He had opinions about business decisions, but no apparent qualifications to back them up. Most concerning of all, he had begun talking about the future of the restaurant as if he had some stake in it. "When we expand the catering operation," he said during one family dinner, using "we" as if he were already a partner rather than someone who had been dating my sister for less than 6 months, I tried to voice my concerns gently, but every attempt was met with resistance. When I suggested to Mom that Derek seemed awfully interested in the business side of things for someone who was supposedly just dating Chloe, she gave me a disappointed look. "Samantha, I'm surprised at you. Derek is just trying to be helpful. He cares about this family, and that includes the restaurant. I think you're being a little paranoid." When I mentioned to Dad that Derek's marketing advice was pretty generic and that we should probably consult with actual restaurant industry experts, Dad's response was sharp. "Derek has fresh eyes and modern ideas. Sometimes being too close to something makes you miss the obvious solutions. Maybe you could learn something from his approach." The message was clear. My concerns weren't welcome, and my expertise wasn't valued. Derek had successfully positioned himself as the insightful outsider, while I remained the overlooked daughter whose opinions didn't carry weight despite my proven track record of business success. But I couldn't have predicted just how far Derek's manipulation would go, or how completely my father's family-first philosophy would crumble when put to the test. The worst was yet to come, and it would shake our family to its core.
6 months into Derek and Chloe's relationship, his integration into our family reached levels that made me increasingly uncomfortable. What had started as casual interest in the restaurant business had evolved into something much more calculated and concerning. Derek wasn't just dating my sister anymore. He was systematically positioning himself as an indispensable part of our family's future. The transformation was subtle but deliberate. Derek began showing up at the restaurant during slow afternoons, claiming he wanted to help out and learn the business. Dad, who had always been protective of his operations and rarely let outsiders behind the scenes, welcomed Derek with open arms. Within weeks, Derek was shadowing Dad during supplier meetings, sitting in on staff scheduling discussions, and even handling some customer complaints. "Derek has a real natural talent for this," Dad would tell anyone who would listen. "He understands customer service in a way that's rare these days.
Yesterday, he turned a 1-star online review into a 5-star customer by personally calling them and making things right. What Dad didn't know, but I discovered through my own investigation, was that Derek had created the fake negative review himself using a burner account. I found this out when I noticed the reviewer's profile had been created the same day as the complaint and had never reviewed any other business. When I brought this to Dad's attention, his response floored me. Even if that were true, which I doubt, it shows Derek's understanding of how these online review systems work, Dad said dismissively. He's thinking strategically about our reputation management. I realized then that Derek had Dad so thoroughly charmed that even evidence of deception was being reframed as business savvy. This wasn't just favoritism, it was willful blindness. Derek's influence expanded beyond the restaurant. He started joining family discussions about finances, offering opinions on everything from mom's retirement planning to whether they should refinance their house. Most disturbingly, he began speaking about long-term plans that assumed his permanent place in the family structure. "When Chloe and I get married," he said during one Sunday dinner, "I've been thinking about ways we could modernize the restaurant's operations, maybe expand into food delivering apps or even franchise the concept." The casual assumption that marriage was inevitable after only 6 months of dating was troubling enough, but Derek's presumption that he would have a say in major business decisions crossed a line that should have alarmed my parents. Instead, they nodded along enthusiastically. "Those are exactly the kind of forward-thinking ideas we need," Dad said, beaming at Derek like he'd just solved world hunger. "The restaurant industry is changing so fast. We need someone with Derek's perspective to help us adapt." I watched this exchange in stunned silence. Here was a man who had been in our lives for less than a year, with no restaurant experience or business credentials, being treated as a strategic visionary. Meanwhile, my offers to help with genuine business analysis and digital transformation, areas where I had proven expertise, continued to be politely dismissed. The breaking point came when Derek suggested that the restaurant needed fresh blood in its management structure. He presented this idea during a family dinner, complete with a PowerPoint presentation he'd prepared on his laptop. The presentation was professional looking, but full of generic business buzzwords and solutions you could find in any basic management textbook. "What we're looking at is a generational transition opportunity," Derek explained, clicking through slides with titles like "Leveraging Synergistic Growth Potential" and "Optimizing Customer Journey Touchpoints." "Mr. Walsh has built an incredible foundation, but to stay competitive, we need to implement next-generation strategies." Dad hung on every word. Mom nodded approvingly. Chloe gazed at Derek with obvious pride, as if he were delivering a Nobel Prize acceptance speech. I sat there watching my family fall for what was essentially a sales pitch, designed to convince them that Derek deserved a formal role in the business. "The key," Derek continued, "is bringing in someone who understands both traditional hospitality values and modern market dynamics, someone who can bridge the gap between the established brand identity and emerging customer expectations." It was masterful manipulation disguised as business consulting. Derek was describing himself as the perfect solution to problems he had identified, problems that conveniently required his specific skill set to solve. The entire presentation was designed to make my parents feel like they needed Derek, not just want him around. When Derek finished his presentation, Dad actually applauded. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that's going to keep us competitive. Derek, would you be interested in taking on a more formal role here? Maybe as a operations consultant to start?" My stomach dropped. This was it. The moment Derek had been working towards all along. He was about to get himself officially embedded in our family business with my father's blessing and enthusiasm.
"I'd be honored to help in any way I can," Derek replied with perfectly calibrated humility. "The Walsh family has been so welcoming to me. Contributing to the success of this business would be a privilege." I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Dad, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" The look Dad gave me was one of barely contained irritation. "Samantha, Derek just shared some valuable insights with us. This isn't the time for—" "It's exactly the time," I interrupted, something I rarely did with my father. "This is a major business decision, and I think we should discuss it as a family before moving forward."
Derek's expression remained pleasantly neutral, but I caught a flicker of calculation in his eyes. He knew I was about to challenge his carefully laid plans. "Of course," Derek said smoothly. "This is a family matter. I'll give you all some privacy to discuss." He started to stand, but Dad waved him back down. "No need for that, Derek. You're practically family already. Samantha, if you have concerns, you can share them here." The message was clear. Derek's opinions were welcome in family discussions, but my concerns needed to be justified in front of the very person I was concerned about. It was a power dynamic that put me at a severe disadvantage, and Derek knew it. "I just think we should slow down and consider all the implications," I said carefully. "Derek has some interesting ideas, but bringing someone into a formal business role is a big step. Maybe we should look at hiring an experienced restaurant consultant instead." "Why would we pay a stranger when Derek is willing to help us for free?" Dad asked. "He's already proven his value by identifying areas where we can improve." "But what are his actual qualifications? What's his background in restaurant management? What other businesses has he consulted for?" The questions hung in the air uncomfortably. Derek maintained his calm expression, but I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "Experience isn't everything, Samantha. Sometimes fresh perspective is more valuable than years of doing things the same way. Derek sees opportunities that we might miss because we're too close to the situation." It was the same dismissal I'd received countless times before, but this time the stakes were higher. Derek wasn't just charming his way into family dinners anymore. He was positioning himself to have real control over our family's livelihood. "I think Derek's ideas have a lot of merit," Mom chimed in, apparently sensing the tension and trying to smooth things over. "And it would be nice to have more help around here. Your father and I aren't getting any younger." Chloe, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "I don't understand why you're being so negative about this, Sam. Derek is trying to help our family. Isn't that what matters?" The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was Chloe, who had never shown the slightest interest in the restaurant business, defending Derek's right to insert himself into our family's operations. Meanwhile, my years of offering genuine help and expertise were being treated as inferior to Derek's 6-month charm offensive. "I'm not being negative," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm being cautious. This is our family's business we're talking about. Don't you think we should make sure we're making smart decisions?" "I think," Dad said with finality, "that Derek has already shown us his commitment to this family and this business. Sam, I appreciate your concern, but sometimes you need to trust other people's judgment instead of thinking you always know best." The conversation was over. Derek had won, and he knew it. As the family began discussing the logistics for his new consulting role, Derek caught my eye across the table. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw a flash of triumph in his expression. He had successfully manipulated his way into our family business with my father's enthusiastic support. But this was just the beginning of Derek's long-term strategy, and I was starting to realize that his ambitions went far beyond a simple consulting role.
Within 2 months of Derek's appointment as operations consultant, the restaurant's financial situation went from bad to worse. What should have been a red flag about Derek's actual business acumen instead became, in my father's mind, proof that Derek's expertise was desperately needed. The worse things got, the more essential Derek seemed to become. It started with Derek's modernization initiatives. His first major change was implementing a new point-of-sale system that he claimed would streamline operations and provide valuable customer analytics. The system cost $12,000 to install and required extensive staff training. Within the first week, it crashed 3 times during dinner rush, causing massive delays and frustrated customers. Growing pains, Derek assured Dad when the complaints started rolling in. Any major technological upgrade comes with a learning curve. The long-term benefits will far outweigh these temporary inconveniences. Dad accepted this explanation without question, even when 3 longtime customers posted negative reviews, specifically mentioning the slow service and technical problems. When I suggested they might want to temporarily revert to the old system until the bugs were worked out, Dad dismissed my concern. "Derek knows what he's doing, Samantha. You can't make progress without taking some risks." Next came Derek's menu optimization project. He convinced Dad that they were losing money on menu items that didn't have high enough profit margins. Derek's solution was to eliminate several popular dishes and replace them with what he called high-value offerings, essentially more expensive versions of simpler dishes. The problem was that Derek had eliminated some of the restaurant's signature items, dishes that regular customers had been ordering for years. Within a month, several longtime patrons stopped coming altogether. When I analyzed the sales data, it was clear that the new menu items weren't selling well enough to offset the loss of loyal customers. "You have to look at the bigger picture," Derek explained when I brought this to Dad's attention. "We're repositioning the brand to attract a more affluent customer base. Short-term revenue dips are expected when you're upgrading your target demographic." Derek had an explanation for everything, and somehow every failure became evidence that his strategy was working exactly as planned. It was masterful gaslighting on a business scale, and Dad was completely buying into it. The most damaging change was Derek's cost optimization initiative. He convinced Dad that they were overstaffed and that streamlining the team would improve efficiency. Over the course of 6 weeks, Derek orchestrated the firing or forced resignation of 4 longtime employees, including Maria, the head chef who had been with the restaurant for 12 years. Maria was resistant to change, Derek explained to Dad. She kept pushing back on the new recipes and refusing to adapt to our updated preparation methods. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions to move the business forward. What Derek didn't mention was that Maria had been the one person on staff who consistently questioned his changes and had the experience to know when his suggestions didn't make practical sense. Her resistance to change was actually professional expertise recognizing bad ideas. But with Maria gone, Derek faced much less pushback from the remaining staff. The cumulative effect of Derek's changes was devastating. Revenue dropped by 30% over 3 months, customer complaints increased dramatically, staff morale plummeted as the remaining employees struggled to maintain quality with reduced support and constant system changes. The restaurant that Dad had spent 30 years building was falling apart under Derek's expert guidance. But instead of recognizing Derek's role in the decline, Dad seemed to interpret the crisis as proof that Derek's help was more crucial than ever. "Thank God we have Derek here to help us navigate these challenges," Dad said during one particularly stressful family dinner. "I don't know what we'd do without his expertise." I watched this unfold with a mixture of frustration and heartbreak. Every instinct I had told me to intervene, to offer concrete help to save the business that represented my father's life work. But I also knew that any suggestion I made would be filtered through Dad's unwavering faith in Derek's judgment. Still, I had to try. I spent a weekend preparing a comprehensive analysis of the restaurant's current situation, complete with financial projections and a detailed recovery plan. I identified specific areas where Derek's changes had caused problems and outlined steps to address each issue. It was the kind of thorough business consultation that would have cost thousands of dollars from a professional firm. When I presented this analysis to Dad, his reaction was exactly what I'd feared. "Samantha, I appreciate the effort you put into this, but you're looking at everything through a negative lens. Derek has explained that these short-term challenges are part of a larger transformation strategy."
Dad, the numbers don't lie, I said, pointing to the revenue charts. The restaurant is losing money at an unsustainable rate. If this continues for another quarter, you'll be facing serious financial problems. Derek has a plan for turning things around, Dad replied firmly. He's working on a marketing campaign that's going to bring in new customers. Sometimes you have to invest in change before you see the returns. It was like talking to someone who had joined a cult. Every piece of evidence that contradicted Derek's narrative was dismissed or reinterpreted to support his vision. Dad had become so emotionally invested in Derek's success that admitting Derek was wrong would mean admitting his own judgment was flawed. The breaking point came when Derek approached Dad with his most ambitious proposal yet, a complete restaurant renovation that would cost nearly $200,000. Derek had put together another slick presentation, this time focusing on creating a modern dining experience that reflects our elevated brand positioning. The renovation would involve gutting the current interior, installing new furniture and lighting, updating the kitchen equipment, and expanding the dining area. Derek had apparently spent weeks researching contractors and getting quotes, presenting himself as the project manager who would oversee the entire transformation. "This is exactly what we need to turn things around," Derek told Dad and Mom during a presentation in our living room. "The current space feels outdated and doesn't match the sophistication of our new menu offerings. A fresh environment will attract the upscale clientele we're targeting." The presentation was convincing, complete with before and after renderings and detailed budget breakdowns. Derek had clearly put significant effort into making the proposal look professional and well-researched. But I could see the fatal flaw that Dad was missing. They didn't have $200,000 to spend on renovations. "Derek, this looks impressive," I said carefully, "but where would the funding for this project come from? The restaurant's current cash flow couldn't support this kind of investment." Derek's smile never wavered. "I've actually been discussing financing options with some contacts in the industry. There are several possibilities for securing the necessary capital." "What kind of financing options?" I pressed. "Well, there's the possibility of bringing in an investor who believes in our vision. Or we could explore small business loans designed specifically for restaurant improvements. There are also some creative partnership opportunities I've been investigating." The vague language set off every alarm bell I had. Derek was talking about major financial commitments without providing any concrete details about how they would be funded or repaid. This wasn't business planning, it was wishful thinking at best and financial manipulation at worst. But Dad was already sold on the idea. "Derek, this could be exactly what we need to get back on track. A fresh start with a fresh look. How quickly could we move forward with this?" "I could have final proposals from contractors within 2 weeks. If we move quickly, we could start construction within a month and be reopened with our new look in time for the holiday season." I felt a chill as I realized what was happening. Derek wasn't just positioning himself as a consultant anymore. He was maneuvering to control a major financial decision that could either save or destroy the restaurant. And given his track record over the past few months, I had serious doubts about which outcome was more likely. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If my father wouldn't listen to my concerns about Derek's competence, maybe it was time to take more direct action to protect our family's business. The restaurant crisis was deepening, but Derek's biggest gamble was yet to come.
The decision to intervene came to me at 2 a.m. as I lay awake thinking about the restaurant's deteriorating condition. I couldn't stand by and watch Derek destroy 30 years of my father's work while positioning himself as the savior. If Dad wouldn't accept my analysis, maybe he'd listen to an outside expert who could validate my concerns. I spent the next morning reaching out to Marcus Chen, a restaurant industry consultant I'd met through my business network. Marcus had over 15 years of experience helping struggling restaurants turn around their operations, and he owed me a favor after I'd helped his firm implement a new project management system the previous year. "Marcus, I need your professional opinion on something," I said when I called him. "My family's restaurant is in trouble, and I think the person they've hired to help them is making things worse. Would you be willing to do an informal assessment?" Marcus agreed to visit Walsh Family Bistro as a regular customer and provide his professional observations. He spent 2 hours there during lunch service, experiencing Derek's changes firsthand: the glitchy POS system, the unpopular new menu items, and the understaffed service.
his assessment was even worse than I'd expected. Samantha, whoever is advising your parents has made almost every mistake possible in restaurant management, Marcus told me the next day. The menu changes eliminated their competitive advantages, the staffing cuts compromise service quality, and that POS system is completely wrong for their operation size. If they continue on this path, they'll be closed within 6 months. Armed with Marcus's professional validation, I requested another family meeting. This time, I brought documentation, Marcus's written assessment, industry benchmarks showing how Walsh Family Bistro compared to successful restaurants, and a detailed financial projection showing the trajectory they were on. Dad, I hired an independent restaurant consultant to assess the current situation, I began, laying out the materials on the dining room table. I think you need to see what an objective expert has to say about the changes that have been made. Dad's expression hardened immediately. You went behind my back and hired someone to spy on our restaurant? I hired someone to provide professional analysis because I'm worried about the business. This consultant has helped dozens of restaurants avoid bankruptcy. His assessment is that the changes Derek has implemented are actually accelerating the restaurant's decline. Derek, who had been invited to this family meeting at Dad's insistence, remained calm, but I could see his mind working. Mr. Walsh, I understand this is creating tension in your family, he said, his voice gentle and concerned. Maybe it would be better if I stepped back from the consulting role. I don't want to be the cause of conflict between you and Samantha. The offer was brilliant manipulation. Derek knew Dad would never accept it, and by suggesting he leave, he was actually forcing Dad to choose between him and me. It was a test of loyalty disguised as selfless concern. Absolutely not, Dad said immediately. Derek, you're not going anywhere. Samantha needs to accept that her opinion isn't the only one that matters. Derek's expression conveyed perfect reluctance as he accepted Dad's insistence he stay. If you're sure, Mr. Walsh, I just want what's best for the family and the business.
Chloe, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke up. Sam, why can't you just support Derek instead of always looking for problems? He's working so hard to help us. The irony was staggering. Here was my sister, who had never contributed a penny or an hour of work to the restaurant, lecturing me about support while I was trying to prevent financial disaster. The meeting ended with my concerns dismissed and Derek's position actually strengthened. But the real shock came 3 days later when Derek called a special family meeting to present what he called his comprehensive solution to the restaurant's challenges. I've been working on this for weeks, Derek announced, setting up his laptop for another presentation. After careful analysis of our situation and extensive consultation with industry contacts, I've developed a strategic partnership opportunity that will solve our funding challenges and position us for massive growth. The presentation was Derek's most sophisticated yet. He had prepared financial projections, market analysis charts, and a detailed business plan that looked professional enough to present to banks. The centerpiece of his proposal was bringing in what he called a strategic investor, someone who would provide the $200,000 needed for renovations, plus additional working capital to sustain operations during the transition period. The investor I've been working with specializes in restaurant revitalization projects, Derek explained, clicking through slides filled with impressive-looking numbers. They're willing to provide $350,000 in total funding in exchange for a 40% ownership stake in the restaurant. Dad's eyes widened. 40%? That's a significant portion of the business. It is, Derek agreed, but consider what we're getting in return, not just funding, but access to their network of suppliers, their marketing expertise, and their proven systems for scaling restaurant operations. This isn't just an investment, it's a complete business transformation. I studied the presentation carefully, looking for details about this mysterious investor. Derek, who exactly is this investor? What's their track record? What other restaurants have they worked with? Derek's answer was characteristically vague. They preferred to maintain confidentiality until the deal is finalized. But I can tell you they've successfully revitalized over a dozen restaurants in the Southwest region. Their approach focuses on preserving the family business aspect while introducing professional management systems. I'd like to see some references, I pressed. Surely they can provide contact information for other restaurant owners they've worked with.
Of course, Derek said smoothly. I'll arrange for you to speak with some of their success stories once we move forward with the preliminary agreement. The deflection was masterful, but I recognized it as a stall tactic. Derek was asking my parents to commit to a major decision without providing verifiable information about the supposed investor. But my father was already sold. Derek, this sounds like exactly what we need, a real partner with industry experience and sufficient capital to implement your vision properly. I think so too, Derek replied. But there is one time-sensitive element. This investor has other opportunities they're considering, so they need a commitment within 2 weeks. If we're going to move forward, we need to sign the preliminary agreement by next Friday. The artificial urgency was another classic manipulation tactic, but it was working. Dad was nodding enthusiastically, already mentally spending the investment money. Mom looked relieved at the prospect of having sufficient funding to address their problems. Even Chloe seemed excited about the possibilities Derek was describing. Only I could see what was really happening. Derek was maneuvering to bring in an outside investor who would effectively give him control of the restaurant through proxy ownership. The mysterious investor was probably Derek himself or someone working with him to execute a sophisticated takeover of our family business. But I had no proof, and my family was too enchanted by Derek's vision to listen to my suspicions. As the meeting concluded with everyone except me expressing enthusiasm for Derek's proposal, I realized that my worst fears were about to be realized. Derek wasn't just trying to insert himself into our family business, he was orchestrating a complete takeover, and he was using my father's trust and desperation to pull it off.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Watching my family prepare to sign away 40% of their life's work to Derek's mysterious investor was unbearable. I knew I had to act decisively, but I also knew that any direct confrontation would only strengthen Derek's position as the misunderstood visionary being undermined by a jealous family member. That's when I made the most difficult financial decision of my life. If Derek's plan succeeded because my parents needed capital, then I would provide that capital myself. I would save the restaurant with my own money, preventing Derek from executing his takeover while giving my family a genuine chance to recover. The numbers were staggering. To match Derek's investor offer, I would need to provide $350,000 immediately, plus additional working capital to sustain operations while implementing real recovery strategies. After reviewing my assets, I calculated that I could liquidate $180,000 from my business savings and personal investments without completely compromising my own financial security. It wasn't the full amount Derek's investor was offering, but combined with some operational changes, it would be enough to stabilize the restaurant and prove that Derek's solution wasn't necessary. I spent 3 sleepless nights working out the details. I would present my offer as a business proposition, not a family bailout. I'd require formal documentation, quarterly progress reports, and specific milestones for improvement. Most importantly, I'd insist on having a real voice in business decisions going forward, something Derek had effectively denied me despite his much shorter involvement with the restaurant. The morning before Derek's investor deadline, I called a family meeting. I arrived with a comprehensive proposal packet, including financial projections, operational recommendations, and a detailed agreement outlining the terms of my investment. Before you sign anything with Derek's investor, I want to present an alternative that keeps the restaurant completely in family control. Dad looked irritated at what he clearly saw as another attempt to undermine Derek. Samantha, we've already discussed this. Derek has found us a qualified investor with industry experience. And I'm offering you a qualified investor with something Derek's contact doesn't have, a genuine commitment to preserving what you've built rather than transforming it beyond recognition. I opened my proposal packet and began outlining my offer. I'm prepared to invest $180,000 immediately to address the restaurant's cash flow problems and fund necessary improvements. Additionally, I'll provide ongoing business consultation to implement recovery strategies that have been proven successful in similar situations. The room went silent. Mom's eyes widened as she processed the amount I was offering.
Chloe looked genuinely surprised that I was willing to invest such a significant sum. Even Derek's carefully maintained composure showed a crack of concern. $180,000, Dad repeated slowly. Samantha, that's a substantial amount of money. It's less than Derek's investor is offering, I acknowledged, but it comes with several advantages. First, you maintain 100% ownership of the restaurant. Second, you're working with someone who understands your vision and values what you've already built. Third, I'm not requiring a rush decision. We can take time to plan the recovery properly. Derek recovered quickly from his initial surprise. Samantha, I really admire your willingness to help your family, but the restaurant needs more than just financial injection. It needs the strategic partnerships and industry connections that only an experienced investor can provide. What strategic partnerships? I challenged. You've been deliberately vague about this investor's other restaurants and business connections. I'm offering transparent terms, verifiable expertise, and a proven track record of business success. Dad studied my proposal documents, his expression thoughtful for the first time in months. These projections look very detailed. You've put significant work into this. I have, because I believe in what you've built here. And I think with the right approach, we can not only save the restaurant, but make it more successful than it's ever been. Derek leaned forward, his voice taking on an urgent tone. Mr. Walsh, I appreciate what Samantha is trying to do, but we can't ignore the timing issue. My investor contact needs a decision today. If we delay, we lose this opportunity entirely. Then maybe we should take that risk, I said firmly. Dad, you've spent 30 years building this restaurant without outside investors. Why start now when you have family willing to help keep it independent?
For a moment, I thought I had won. Dad was nodding slowly, and Mom was looking at my financial projections with obvious relief. Even Chloe seemed intrigued by the possibility of keeping the restaurant in family hands. But Derek had one more card to play, and it was devastating. I hate to bring this up, Derek said with apparent reluctance, but there's something I need to share about my investors' research into the restaurant situation. They've identified some concerning patterns in the recent financial decline that suggest the problems are more systemic than we initially realized. He pulled out his own folder of documents. According to their analysis, the restaurant's issues began before I started consulting here. The revenue decline, customer complaints, and operational problems were already developing. My efforts have actually slowed the decline, not accelerated it. I stared at Derek in amazement. He was rewriting history in real time, presenting a narrative that painted himself as the solution to problems that existed before his arrival rather than the cause of new ones. That's not accurate, I said, pulling out my own timeline analysis. The revenue decline specifically correlates with the implementation of your changes. The POS system problems, menu modifications, and staff reductions all happened after you started consulting. Derek shook his head sympathetically. I understand why it might appear that way, but correlation isn't causation. The restaurant was already struggling, which is why your parents needed help in the first place. The changes I implemented exposed existing problems rather than creating new ones. It was masterful gaslighting, and I could see it working on my family. Derek was taking credit for exposing problems while denying responsibility for creating them. Worse, he was positioning my investment offer as insufficient to address these supposedly deeper issues. Even with Samantha's generous offer, Derek continued, we'd still need the strategic expertise and industry connections that my investor provides. The money alone won't solve problems that require specialized knowledge to address. Dad was wavering. I could see him processing Derek's reframed narrative and finding it compelling. The idea that the restaurant's problems were more complex than simple financial challenges gave Derek's investor offer additional appeal. Derek raises valid concerns, Dad said, slowly. Samantha, your offer is incredibly generous, but if the problems are as complex as Derek suggests, maybe we do need more than just financial support. I felt my last chance slipping away. Dad, please, let me prove the traditional business principles can solve these problems. Give me 6 months with my investment, and if we don't see significant improvement, you can always pursue other options. Derek's response was swift and decisive. Unfortunately, my investor can't wait 6 months while we experiment with different approaches. They need a commitment today, or they'll move on to other opportunities. The artificial deadline was doing exactly what Derek intended, forcing a rushed decision that favored his proposal over mine. But I had underestimated just how completely Derek had positioned himself as indispensable. I think we have to go with Derek's investor, Dad announced after a long pause. Samantha, your offer is incredibly generous, but if the problems are as complex as Derek suggests, maybe we do need more than just financial support. The rejection felt like a physical blow. After offering to risk $180,000 of my own money to save their business, my family was choosing Derek's mysterious investor over me. The family first philosophy that had governed our household my entire life apparently had exceptions when it conflicted with Derek's agenda. But Derek wasn't finished. He had one final manipulation that would transform my generous offer into the catalyst for the ultimate betrayal I never saw coming.
What happened next still takes my breath away when I think about it. Just when I thought Derek had achieved his goal of securing the investor deal, he revealed a level of manipulation that was breathtaking in its audacity and cruelty. Actually, Derek said, his voice taking on a thoughtful tone, Samantha's offer has given me an idea that might be even better for the family. I looked up from packing my rejected proposal documents, wondering what new angle Derek was about to pursue. What if we combined the best elements of both approaches? Derek continued, his eyes bright with apparent inspiration. Samantha clearly has significant capital available and genuine commitment to the restaurant's success. My investor contact has the strategic expertise and industry connections we need. Maybe there's a way to structure a partnership that leverages both resources. Dad's expression shifted from settled resolution to renewed interest. What kind of partnership are you thinking about? Derek leaned forward, his voice taking on the excited tone of someone who had just solved a complex puzzle. Here's what I'm envisioning. Samantha provides the capital investment she offered, the $180,000, which demonstrates the family's commitment to the project. My investor then matches that amount and provides the strategic oversight. But instead of taking a 40% ownership stake, the investor takes a smaller equity position and focuses on operational management. I felt a chill as I began to understand where this was heading. Derek was positioning me to provide the capital while his mysterious investor maintained control. That could work, Mom said, looking between Derek and me hopefully. Samantha gets to contribute as she wanted, but we still get the expertise Derek says we need. Exactly, Derek agreed enthusiastically. It's a true family partnership with professional support. Samantha's investment proves the family's skin in the game, which makes the investor more confident about committing their resources and expertise. Dad was nodding along, clearly attracted to the idea of accessing both my money and Derek's supposed expertise. Samantha, what do you think? Would you be willing to modify your proposal to work within this kind of structure? The question hung in the air as I processed what Derek was really proposing. He wanted me to provide $180,000 while surrendering any meaningful control over how that money was used. His investor would make the decisions, implement the strategies, and potentially profit from my financial risk. I'd need to understand the specifics, I said carefully. Who exactly would have decision-making authority? What happens if the investor's strategies don't work? How would my investment be protected? Derek's smile never wavered. All excellent questions that we'd work out in the formal partnership agreement. The key thing is establishing the framework that allows us to move forward before we lose the investor's interest. There it was again.
the artificial urgency designed to prevent careful consideration of the details. Derek was asking me to commit $180,000 based on a vague framework and promises of future clarification. I need more information before I can agree to anything, I said firmly. Who exactly is this investor? What's their background? What specific strategies are they planning to implement? Derek's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of impatience he'd revealed all day. Samantha, I understand your desire for details, but we're running up against the deadline. Sometimes you have to trust the process and work out the specifics as you go. Not when it involves $180,000 of my money, I replied. If this investor is legitimate and qualified, providing references and credentials shouldn't be a problem. The room went quiet as my family processed the standoff between Derek and me. I could see them weighing Derek's optimistic vision against my practical concerns, and I had a sinking feeling about which way they were leaning. Dad cleared his throat. Samantha, Derek has been working with this investor for weeks. He's done the due diligence. At some point, you have to trust his judgment. The irony was staggering. My father was asking me to trust Derek's judgment about an investor Derek wouldn't identify, while dismissing my proven track record of successful business decisions. What if we structure it differently? Derek suggested, apparently sensing my resistance. What if Samantha's investment gives her a formal role in the restaurant's operations, not just as a financial backer, but as an active partner in the business? I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Derek was finally offering me the voice in family business decisions that I'd been seeking for years. What kind of role? I asked. Derek pulled out his phone and began typing notes. We could make you the chief financial officer, with oversight of all budget decisions and financial planning. You'd work closely with the investor's operational team to ensure sound fiscal management.
On the surface, it sounded like exactly what I'd wanted. A formal position that utilized my expertise and gave me real influence over the restaurant's direction. But something about Derek's freezing bothered me. You said I'd work with the investor's operational team, I noted. Does that mean they'd have final authority over business decisions? It means you'd be part of the decision-making process, a key voice in determining strategy and implementation. The non-answer was telling. Derek was offering me a title and involvement without actual authority. I'd be the chief financial officer, but the investor would make the financial decisions. I'd provide the capital, but Derek's team would control how it was spent. Chloe, who had been unusually quiet during this discussion, suddenly spoke up. Sam, this sounds like exactly what you've been asking for. A real role in the restaurant, recognition for your business skills, and the chance to work with experienced people who can help make it successful. Her intervention felt orchestrated. Derek had been dating Chloe for over a year now, and I wondered how much coaching she'd received about what to say in this moment. It does sound appealing, I admitted carefully, but I need to see the formal agreement before I can commit. I want to understand exactly what my role would entail and what authority I'd actually have. Derek's smile broadened. Of course, I'll have the preliminary agreement drafted by tomorrow morning. Once you see how everything fits together, I think you'll be excited about the possibilities. The meeting concluded with tentative plans to review Derek's formal proposal the next day. As everyone dispersed, Derek lingered to speak with Dad privately. I couldn't hear their conversation, but Derek's body language suggested he was providing reassurance about something. That night, I called my friend Melissa to talk through what had happened. It sounds like he's trying to get your money while keeping control, she said after I explained the situation. If this investor is real and legitimate, why won't Derek provide basic information about them? Her question crystallized my concerns. Derek's reluctance to share details about his investor contact wasn't just unusual, it was a red flag that suggested something fundamentally dishonest about his proposal. I decided to do my own research. If Derek wouldn't provide information about his investor, maybe I could find it myself. I spent hours online searching for restaurant investment firms that matched Derek's vague descriptions, looking for any company that specialized in restaurant revitalization projects in the Southwest region. What I found was disturbing. There were very few legitimate firms that matched Derek's description, and none of them had the kind of track record he'd claimed. Most concerning of all, I couldn't find any evidence that Derek had the industry connections he'd been claiming for months. By dawn, I had reached a troubling conclusion. Derek's investor was probably fictional, an elaborate fiction designed to manipulate my family into giving him control of their business. And now he was trying to use my own money to fund his takeover? The formal agreement Derek presented the next morning would confirm my worst suspicions and set the stage for a confrontation that would tear our family apart.
Derek arrived at my parents' house the next morning with a leather portfolio containing what he called the Partnership Framework Agreement. He'd apparently worked through the night to prepare the documents, which he presented with the same polished confidence he'd shown throughout his manipulation campaign. "I think you'll find this addresses all the concerns we discussed yesterday," Derek said, handing me a copy of the agreement. "Everything is structured to protect Samantha's investment while ensuring we have the operational flexibility to implement necessary changes." I began reading immediately, and within the first 2 pages, my worst fears were confirmed. The agreement was a masterpiece of legal manipulation, designed to extract my money while giving me virtually no real control over how it was used. According to the document, I would invest $180,000 in exchange for the title of Chief Financial Officer and a 15% ownership stake in the restaurant. Derek's investor, identified only as Strategic Hospitality Partners LLC, would contribute $180,000 in matching funds and receive a 25% ownership stake plus complete operational control. My parents would retain 60% ownership, but would surrender all decision-making authority to Strategic Hospitality Partners for a period of 3 years. The terms were stunning in their audacity. I would provide half the investment capital, but receive less than half the ownership stake that Derek's investor would get. More importantly, despite my CFO title, the agreement explicitly stated that all financial decisions would require approval from Strategic Hospitality Partners' operational manager, who would undoubtedly be Derek himself. "This agreement gives your investor complete control over the restaurant for 3 years," I said, looking up from the documents. "They can make any operational, staffing, or financial decision they want, regardless of what the other partners think." Derek's expression remained pleasant and professional. "That's standard for this type of arrangement, Samantha. The operational partner needs sufficient authority to implement their strategic vision. Having to get approval from multiple parties for every decision would slow down the recovery process." "But what if their decisions are wrong?" I pressed. "What if their strategies damage the business further? According to this agreement, we'd have no recourse except to wait 3 years for the management contract to expire." "That's why we're working with an experienced firm with a proven track record. Strategic Hospitality Partners wouldn't risk their reputation on strategies they weren't confident would succeed." I flipped to the section detailing Strategic Hospitality Partners' background and credentials. What I found there made my blood run cold. The company was described in the vaguest possible terms, with no specific information about previous projects, management team, or track record. Even worse, the address listed for the company was a generic business park in Phoenix, the kind of place where mailbox rental services operated. "Derek, this company description is extremely vague," I said, pointing to the relevant section. "There are no specifics about their previous work, no references from other restaurant owners, and no detailed information about their management approach." Derek waved off my concerns with practiced ease. "The detailed operational plans will be provided once the partnership agreement is signed. They protect their proprietary methodologies until the formal relationship is established."
It was another classic stall tactic, but this time I wasn't going to accept it. I need to speak with references before I sign anything. I want contact information for at least 3 restaurant owners who have worked with strategic hospitality partners. I'll see what I can arrange, Derek said, but his tone suggested he had no intention of providing real references. Dad, who had been reading his own copy of the agreement, looked up with a furrowed brow. Derek, this does seem to give your investor firm quite a bit of control. Are you sure this is standard for these types of partnerships? It was the first time I'd heard Dad express any doubt about Derek's proposals, and I could see Derek's slight panic as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. Mr. Walsh, I understand the arrangement might seem unusual, but remember what we're dealing with here, Derek said, his voice taking on an urgent tone. The restaurant is in crisis. Traditional approaches haven't worked. We need decisive leadership and clear authority to implement changes quickly. What traditional approaches? I interjected. Dad, the restaurant was stable before Derek started making changes. The crisis he's describing is largely the result of his own modifications to systems that were working. Derek's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of anger before he regains his composure. Samantha, I know you're concerned about your investment, but we can't let fear of change prevent us from taking necessary action.
That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number listed for Strategic Hospitality Partners, LLC, in the agreement. If Derek's investor was legitimate, someone would answer and be able to provide basic information about their company. The phone rang once, then went directly to a generic voicemail message. You have reached the voicemail box for this number. Please leave a message after the tone. I hung up and tried again with the same result. Then I searched online for Strategic Hospitality Partners, LLC. What I found was a basic website that had been created less than 2 weeks ago with stock photos and generic business language that provided no real information about the company's background or services. Derek, I said, my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. Strategic Hospitality Partners, LLC doesn't exist, does it? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Derek's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, revealing the calculating predator that had been hidden beneath his charming facade. Of course it exists, he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. They're a private firm that prefers to maintain a low profile. A private firm with a website created 2 weeks ago and a phone number that goes straight to voicemail? I stood up, my voice rising. Derek, you've been lying to my family for months. There is no investor. There is no Strategic Hospitality Partners. You've been planning to take control of our restaurant using my money to fund your scheme. Dad's face went pale as he processed what I was saying. Mom dropped her copy of the agreement, her hands trembling. Even Chloe looked shocked, though I noticed she was watching Derek's reaction more than expressing surprise at my accusation. Derek made one final attempt to salvage his plan. Samantha, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Strategic Hospitality Partners is a newly formed entity specifically created for this project. The principals behind it are experienced restaurant professionals who prefer to operate through specialized investment vehicles. It was pure fabrication, and everyone in the room could feel it. Derek was improvising desperately, trying to explain away the evidence of his deception. Show us, I demanded. Give us the names and contact information for these experienced restaurant professionals. Let us speak with them directly. Derek's silence was answer enough. After months of manipulation, elaborate presentations, and calculated charm, his house of lies was finally collapsing. But even as Derek's scheme unraveled, the damage to our family relationships was just beginning to become clear. The person who had been manipulating us for over a year wasn't going to disappear quietly, and his final desperate moves would reveal just how deeply his corruption had infected our family dynamics. The silence that followed Derek's exposure stretched for what felt like an eternity. I watched my family process the reality that someone they had trusted completely had been systematically deceiving them for over a year.
The expressions on their faces, shock, confusion, and dawning betrayal, would be burned into my memory forever. Dad was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Derek, is what Samantha is saying true? Have you been lying to us about this investor?" Derek's response was a masterclass in manipulation under pressure. Instead of confessing or defending himself directly, he shifted the narrative to position himself as the victim of my suspicion and hostility. "Mr. Walsh, I can see how Samantha's investigation might have created confusion," Derek said, his voice taking on a tone of hurt disappointment. "The truth is, I have been trying to protect this family from a very difficult situation. Strategic Hospitality Partners is real, but they're not a traditional investment firm. They're a group of private individuals who invest in family businesses facing a crisis." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I didn't want to reveal their identities because they require confidentiality until agreements are finalized. But since Samantha has forced this confrontation, I'll have to ask them if they're willing to speak with you directly." It was brilliant deflection. Derek was acknowledging that his story had problems while blaming me for creating those problems through my investigation. He was also buying time by promising future verification that he had no intention of providing. Mom, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "Derek, I'm confused. If these investors are real, why didn't you just tell us their names from the beginning?" "Because they specifically requested discretion," Derek replied, his voice conveying perfectly calibrated frustration. "Mrs. Walsh, these are successful business people who don't want their investment strategies publicized. They work through intermediaries like me to maintain privacy." Chloe suddenly stood up, her face flushed with anger, but to my shock, her anger was directed at me, not Derek. "Sam, I cannot believe you're doing this to Derek. He's been working for months to help our family, and you're treating him like some kind of criminal." Her defense of Derek was so immediate and passionate that I realized their relationship was deeper than I'd understood. Derek hadn't just been manipulating my parents, he'd been coaching Chloe to be his advocate and defender. "Chloe, he's been lying to us," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "The company he's been talking about doesn't exist. The website was created 2 weeks ago with stock photos." "Maybe because it's a new investment vehicle created specifically for our situation. Did you think about that? Not everything is some elaborate conspiracy, Sam." I stared at my sister in disbelief. Even with clear evidence of Derek's deception, she was creating alternative explanations to defend him. Derek had completely turned her against her own family's interests. Derek seized on Chloe's support to launch his most audacious manipulation yet. "I can see that my efforts to help this family have created more problems than solutions," he said, his voice heavy with apparent regret. "Maybe it would be better if I stepped away entirely and let the family handle things on their own." The statement was pure emotional manipulation. Derek was positioning his exposure as evidence of his selfless dedication, suggesting that the family would be worse off without his help. Dad's response was exactly what Derek was hoping for. "Derek, please don't make any hasty decisions. If there's been a misunderstanding, we can work through it." "Mr. Walsh, I've invested over a year of my time trying to help save this restaurant. I've put my own reputation on the line, connecting you with investors who could turn things around, and now I'm being accused of being some kind of con artist." The reframing was masterful. Derek was casting himself as the dedicated consultant whose reputation was being unfairly attacked, rather than the manipulator whose lies had been exposed. But then Derek made a crucial miscalculation. Perhaps sensing that his position was becoming untenable, he decided to play his nuclear option, a revelation that would force my family to choose between him and me once and for all. "Since we're apparently sharing everything now," Derek said, his tone shifting to something colder and more calculated, "maybe it's time the family knew about Samantha's real motivations for opposing my efforts." I felt a chill of foreboding. Derek was about to launch some kind of attack on me, and I had no idea what he was planning to say.
For months, Samantha has been undermining every suggestion I've made, not because they were bad ideas, but because she couldn't stand that your parents were finally getting help from someone other than her. Derek continued, his voice gaining confidence as he built his narrative.
She's been the family's financial savior for so long that she can't accept anyone else filling that role. Her investigation into strategic hospitality partners wasn't about protecting the family. It was about maintaining her position as the only person you could turn to for help. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Derek was reframing my legitimate concerns about his competence and honesty as jealousy and possessiveness. He was turning my history of supporting the family into evidence of my selfishness. "That's not true," I said, but I could hear the defensiveness in my own voice. Derek pressed his advantage. "Isn't it? Samantha, you offered $180,000 to save the restaurant, but only if you got complete control over how it was used. You demanded that I be removed from any advisory role. You investigated my investor contacts without telling anyone. Every action you've taken has been designed to eliminate my involvement and make yourself indispensable." The worst part was that Derek's accusations contained just enough truth to be compelling. I had wanted control over how my investment was used. I had wanted Derek removed from his advisory role. I had investigated his investor contacts secretly. But Derek was deliberately ignoring the context, that I wanted control because his decisions were damaging the business, that I wanted him removed because his advice was incompetent, and that I investigated secretly because he refused to provide information openly. Chloe was nodding along with Derek's explanation, and I could see doubt creeping into Mom's expression. Even Dad looked troubled, as if Derek's reframing was making him reconsider everything that had happened. "You see how she's been manipulating all of us?" Derek continued, his voice taking on a tone of sad revelation. "Samantha positioned herself as the family's savior, but only so she could control everyone's decisions. When I offered an alternative that would give your parents real independence, she couldn't handle losing that control. It was a devastating attack, and I realized that Derek had been planning this character assassination for weeks. He had studied my psychology, identified my vulnerabilities, and prepared a narrative that would turn my own family against me. But Derek had made one critical error. In his desperation to destroy my credibility, he had revealed his true nature, the cold, calculating manipulator who had been hiding behind his charming facade for over a year. And that revelation would finally open my family's eyes to what they had been dealing with all along.
The moment Derek finished his character assassination, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. His calculated attack had been so vicious, so personally targeted, that even my family members who had been defending him began to see him differently. The charming consultant who always had encouraging words had been replaced by someone cold and predatory. Mom was the first to recognize the change. "Derek," she said slowly, "that was a very cruel thing to say about Samantha. Even if you're frustrated, there's no need to attack her character like that." Derek's expression flickered with surprise. He had expected his attack to turn the family against me, but instead, Mom was criticizing his tactics. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry if my words seemed harsh, but I think it's important for the family to understand all the dynamics at play here. What I understand," Mom continued, her voice growing stronger, "is that my daughter has been supporting this family financially for years without asking for anything in return. And now you're suggesting that her generosity was actually some kind of manipulation?" I felt a surge of gratitude toward Mom. For the first time in the entire Derek saga, she was standing up for me against someone Dad favored. Dad, however, was still processing Derek's accusations. "Patricia, Derek might have a point about the control issues. Samantha has always been very particular about how things should be done." "Greg," Mom said sharply, "Samantha offered to invest $180,000 of her own money to save our restaurant.
Derek offered to bring in a fake investor who would take control of our business. How are you even comparing these two situations? The directness of Mom's statement seemed to shock Dad into really considering what had been happening. For months, he had been so enchanted by Derek's vision that he hadn't critically evaluated the actual proposals being made. Chloe, however, was still firmly in Derek's camp. "Mom, you're being unfair to Derek. He's been working so hard to help us, and now everyone's turning against him based on Sam's paranoid theories?" It was then that Derek made his second critical mistake. Emboldened by Chloe's continued support, he decided to double down on his attack rather than retreating to regroup. "Chloe's right," Derek said, his voice taking on an edge of anger that he had never shown before. "I've spent over a year trying to help this family, dealing with Samantha's constant interference and hostility. Maybe it's time to be completely honest about what's been happening here." He turned to face Dad directly, his expression harder than I'd ever seen it. "Mr. Walsh, your older daughter has been sabotaging every effort to improve this restaurant because she can't stand the idea of anyone else having influence in this family. She's used her money to buy control over family decisions, and she's willing to destroy the business rather than share that control." The accusation was so outrageous and delivered with such venom that even Chloe looked taken aback. This wasn't the supportive, understanding Derek she had been dating. This was someone who seemed genuinely angry at our entire family. "Derek," Dad said slowly, "I think you should calm down. We're all trying to work through a difficult situation here." "Calm down?" Derek's voice rose sharply. "I've been calm for months while being undermined and disrespected. I've been professional while dealing with someone who's been working against me from day one. Maybe it's time I stopped being so accommodating." The mask was completely off now. Derek's charming facade had crumbled, revealing the entitled, manipulative person he had always been underneath. The transformation was so dramatic that it was impossible to ignore. Mom looked genuinely frightened by Derek's outburst. "Derek, I think you need to leave. We can discuss this when everyone has had time to cool down." "I'll leave when I'm ready to leave," Derek snapped, his voice carrying a threatening undertone that made everyone in the room tense. That's when Dad finally saw Derek clearly. The military officer who had spent decades reading people and assessing threats recognized the aggression and entitlement that Derek was displaying. "Derek, you need to go now. This conversation is over." Derek stared at Dad for a long moment, apparently realizing that he had completely destroyed his position with his outburst. But instead of apologizing or trying to salvage the situation, he decided to inflict as much damage as possible on his way out. "Fine," Derek said, his voice dripping with contempt, "but you should all know what you're getting into. This restaurant is failing because your whole family is dysfunctional. Samantha is a control freak who uses money to manipulate people. Your wife is a doormat who's never had an original thought in her life. And you, Mr. Walsh, are a stubborn old man who refuses to admit when he's wrong."
"And Chloe," Derek continued, turning to my sister with a sneer, "you're just like your parents, weak and easily manipulated. I've been stringing you along for over a year because you were useful for getting close to the family money. Did you really think I was interested in marrying someone with no job, no money, and no prospects?" The words hit Chloe like a physical blow. She had been Derek's strongest defender, and he was now revealing that their entire relationship had been a calculated manipulation designed to access our family's resources. "Get out," Dad said, his voice deadly quiet in the way I remembered from childhood when he was truly angry. "Get out of my house right now and don't ever come back." Derek smiled coldly. "Don't worry, I'm done with all of you. Good luck saving your pathetic little restaurant without me. You'll be bankrupt within 6 months." He gathered his belongings and walked toward the door, but paused for one final attack. "And Samantha, when this place fails, and it will, remember that it happened because you couldn't stand letting someone actually qualified help your family."
The front door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, my family sat in stunned shock, processing what had just happened. Derek's true nature had been revealed in all its ugly glory. The charming consultant who had promised to save our restaurant was actually a predator who had been systematically manipulating us for over a year. His investment plan was fictional, his business advice was incompetent, and his relationship with Chloe was a calculated strategy to access our family's money. But the damage Derek had inflicted went far beyond his failed scheme. His final attack had targeted each family member's deepest wounds, and the words he had spoken couldn't be taken back. As we sat in the aftermath of Derek's departure, I realized that exposing his lies was only the beginning. Now we had to figure out how to rebuild our family relationships and save the restaurant, both of which had been seriously damaged by Derek's year-long manipulation campaign.
The silence that followed Derek's explosive exit lasted for nearly 10 minutes. We all sat in my parents' living room, each processing the revelation that someone we had trusted had been systematically deceiving and manipulating us for over a year. The emotional wounds from Derek's final attack were still raw, but there was also a strange sense of relief that the truth had finally been exposed. Chloe was the first to break the silence, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe I defended him," she whispered. "I can't believe I chose him over my own family." I moved to sit beside her on the couch, putting my arm around her shoulders. "Chloe, Derek was a professional manipulator. He targeted each of us in different ways. You're not stupid for believing someone who was deliberately deceiving you." "But I said such terrible things to you," she sobbed. "I accused you of being jealous and controlling when you were just trying to protect us. How could I have been so blind?" "Because he made you feel special and appreciated," I said gently. "That's what manipulators do. They identify what you need emotionally and then provide it while advancing their own agenda." Dad, who had been sitting in his armchair with his head in his hands, finally looked up. "Samantha, I owe you an enormous apology. You tried to warn us about Derek repeatedly, and not only did I not listen, I actively dismissed your concerns." "Dad, he fooled all of us." "No," Dad interrupted firmly. "He didn't fool you. You saw through him from the beginning, and I chose to believe a stranger over my own daughter. That's on me, not on Derek." He stood up and began pacing, his military bearing evident as he processed the situation strategically. "Let me understand what actually happened here. Derek spent over a year implementing changes that damaged our restaurant's profitability and reputation. He eliminated successful menu items, fired experienced staff, and installed systems that didn't work. Then, he created a fake investment company to convince us to give him formal control of the business while using your money to fund his takeover." "That's exactly what happened," I confirmed. "And when you exposed his scheme, he attacked our family with information he'd gathered during months of manipulation, trying to cause maximum emotional damage on his way out." "Yes." Dad stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Samantha, everything Derek accused you of, wanting control, being possessive about your role in the family, even if any of that were true, it wouldn't excuse what he did to us. But more importantly, I don't think any of it is true." He sat down across from me, his expression more serious than I'd seen in years. "You offered to invest $180,000 of your own money to save our restaurant with no guarantee of return and significant personal financial risk. You hired an independent consultant to validate your concerns instead of just attacking Derek personally. You researched his claims thoroughly before exposing his lies. Those aren't the actions of someone trying to control the family. They're the actions of someone trying to protect it." Mom, who had been quietly observing our conversation, finally spoke. "Greg's right, sweetheart. Derek's accusations about your motivations were designed to hurt you and turn us against you. But looking back at your actual behavior over the years, all I see is a daughter who has consistently supported this family without asking for recognition or control in return. The validation from both parents after months of feeling dismissed and undervalued was overwhelming. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. "So, what do we do now?" Chloe asked, wiping her eyes. "The restaurant is still in trouble, and Derek was right about one thing. We need help fixing the problems he created." I had been thinking about this question since Derek's departure. Actually, I think the situation might be more salvageable than Derek wanted us to believe. A lot of the damage he caused can be reversed fairly quickly. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I had been tracking the restaurant's issues. We can bring back the popular menu items he eliminated. You still have all the recipes and supplier relationships. We can replace the problematic POS system with something more reliable. Most importantly, we can rehire some of the experienced staff Derek forced out, assuming they're willing to come back. Dad was nodding as I spoke. "Maria called last week asking if we had any catering opportunities. I think she'd be interested in returning as head chef." "That would be huge," I said. "She knows the operation better than anyone, and customers trust her cooking." Over the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive recovery plan. I would provide the $180,000 investment as originally proposed, but with a formal agreement that gave me genuine input into business decisions while respecting Dad's ownership and final authority. We would reverse Derek's most damaging changes immediately and implement gradual improvements based on Marcus Chen's professional recommendations.
Most importantly, we established new communication protocols to ensure that major business decisions would be discussed openly as a family, with no outside advisors gaining unilateral influence over operations. 3 months later, Walsh Family Bistro was not only stable, but actually performing better than it had before Derek's involvement. Revenue had recovered to previous levels, customer complaints had virtually disappeared, and staff morale was higher than it had been in years. Maria had returned as head chef and brought back 2 other experienced employees who had been forced out during Derek's optimization period. The family relationships were healing, more slowly, but progress was steady. Dad made a genuine effort to value my input and expertise, asking for my advice on business decisions and actually implementing my suggestions. Mom had found her voice in standing up for what she believed was right, even when it meant disagreeing with Dad. Chloe was rebuilding her confidence and sense of judgment after the Derek experience, and she had started taking a real interest in the restaurant business for the first time. As for Derek, we never heard from him directly again, though Chloe discovered through mutual friends that he had moved to Dallas and was apparently working similar schemes on other unsuspecting families. We considered reporting him to authorities, but without clear evidence of financial fraud, there wasn't much legal action we could take. The experience taught all of us valuable lessons about trust, family dynamics, and the importance of maintaining healthy skepticism about people who seem too good to be true. Derek had exploited our individual vulnerabilities and the existing tensions in our family relationships. But ultimately, his manipulation had forced us to address issues that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. 6 months after Derek's departure, I was sitting in the restaurant during a busy dinner service, watching my family work together more effectively than they had in years. Dad was greeting customers with genuine enthusiasm. Mom was coordinating with suppliers while keeping an eye on the dining room. And Chloe was learning the business from the ground up with a newfound appreciation for the work involved. The family-first philosophy that Dad had always preached was finally being practiced authentically, with mutual respect and genuine consideration for each other's perspectives and contributions. It had taken a crisis to get us there, but we had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. And most importantly, we had learned that real family loyalty means protecting each other from those who would exploit our love and trust for their own gain. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.